I think they're also demonstrating a genuine concern as to what the science says they can do best to keep their employees safe and to keep the public safe. So I think what they're doing is commendable. I think it takes some courage because these things are, controversial with some, as we've seen. But I think it's the right thing to do, and you can never go wrong doing the right thing.
Well, vaccines in the workplace is a hot topic this week. Today, 3 of the country's big banks, Metrolinx and the Toronto Zoo, added themselves to the growing number of employers requiring their employees to be fully vaccinated. The move comes as Toronto's medical officer of health calls on employers to implement a policy. This week, we've also seen vaccine mandates for the City of Toronto employees, TTC workers, and the Ontario Public Service. And breaking tonight, the University Health Network confirms any employees who decide not to get vaccinated by the end of October will be terminated. Joining us live tonight, employment lawyer and founding partner at Whitten Lublin, Daniel Lublin, along with organizational behavior professor at the University of Toronto here in Toronto, David Zweig. Thank you both for joining us. I'm going to start with you, David, actually first. I'm going to actually start with Daniel. 2 Ds here. It's the employment lawyer I want up first. Daniel, I was prepared to ask you about the legalities of all this, but now we have a perfect case study here in the city of Toronto with the University Health Network, which is responsible for the most prominent hospitals here in our city, saying if you're not vaccinated, you're fired. Can they do this?
Good evening. The answer is yes, and they should be applauded for being clear about what will happen in the event you refuse to vaccinate. The problem with the compulsory vaccination policies that we've seen from the big banks, the federal government, and others is they've been sufficiently or completely ambiguous as to what will happen in the event you don't vaccinate, and that's not going to really drive any behavioral change. Legally, employers can force vaccination. They cannot trample on human rights grounds. They have to respect religious illness or disabilities. And then the question that everybody has is, for those who refuse to vaccinate pursuant to these policies, will they be fired and will they be paid severance? And the UHN has not said whether or not they will pay severance.
Okay, on the topic of firing, though, what would be an acceptable human rights issue where you could say, due to this human rights issue, I am not going to get vaccinated? What would be acceptable?
The main one would be an illness or disability. For example, some pregnant employees may feel uncomfortable with the vaccination. There's some medical support for that. Other illnesses or disabilities would qualify as an exemption. There's a very limited exemption for religious beliefs, but there are really only 1 or 2 actual religions that prohibit vaccination. Those would be the human rights exemptions.
Okay, Daniel, I'll get back to you in a moment. David, I want to bring you in. Do you think this has support in the wider private sector community? We've seen everyone from Shopify to Google to all sorts of private sector industries here in Toronto, including the big banks, saying you have to get vaccinated. People have been telling me these industries should be applauded. But then there is, of course, the constitutionality of it. We know that will fly, that will pass. But what do you think the popular opinion is?
Well, I think everyone has been looking at what the federal government did last week in mandating vaccinations for its employees. And they were, waiting to see what the fallout would be. And there wasn't really much fallout. And that gave them a lot of license to say, okay, let's move forward. Let's create some mandates here for vaccination. And, they're basically sending a message to their employees and their customers that they're creating a physically and psychologically safe space for them to come and do their work and to participate with these organizations. And so, I don't think there's been a big backlash, and people are anxious for organizations to come up very strongly with strong mandates.
But I mean, I don't think these organizations would have to do this if they felt amongst their staff and employees that there was a high vaccination rate. Do any of you have a general idea, perhaps maybe Daniel, in the private sector here in Toronto or beyond, what the vaccination rate is like? Is it so much so, or is it not sufficient that some of these companies have to say, look, you have to get vaccinated?
The vaccination rates are comparable to what we see across Canada. In the range of 80%. And I'm hearing from my corporate clients that there are a couple straggler individuals who just haven't gotten around to it. And then there are a couple who are just opposed to it for one reason or another. So the vast majority of employees are already vaccinated. The vast majority of individuals who don't want to vaccinate Many of them are working from home, and employers haven't really forced them to return to work, so they're not really a problem. So it's really a minority of individuals who are going to face this situation of vaccinate or terminate.
Okay, I want to get back to you, Daniel, in just a moment. David, I want to bring you in. I want to share again, just for you specifically, David, what the University Health Network said today. They said for their unvaccinated staff, and again, a reminder, University Health Network is responsible for the biggest hospitals here in Toronto. They say after October the 8th, if their staff is not vaccinated, they will be placed on a unpaid leave for 2 weeks. If it is still their decision at the end of the 2 weeks that they won't be vaccinated, their employment will end. What do you say to this unpaid leave and the constitutionality of that, or in terms of labor relations? I mean, does that fly? Is that fair? Is there any repercussions?
Listen, I'm not an employment lawyer. I'll defer to the expert on that, but I can tell you that they're sending a strong signal. They're telling their employees, for the ones who are still maybe hesitant about getting vaccinated, get it done. Right? Mm-hmm. We're not messing around anymore. Get it done. And you're going to be expected to be vaccinated if you want to return to work. And they're also sending a message to everyone who, works at the UHN and all of the patients who come out of UHN, in and out of UHN hospitals, that we are protecting you. And it's an important message. Yeah,
Daniel, I didn't forget about you. I want to ask you about the unpaid leave. You also brought up severance. On the topic of unpaid leave, any sort of legal action that an employee can take saying, my workplace is putting me on unpaid leave for not getting vaccinated. And after that, if there is no severance, can these employees sue for some kind of severance or even wrongful dismissal?
No question in my mind that an unpaid leave is a constructive or effective termination. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, the UHN probably has a large proportion of its workplace that are unionized employees, which makes it even more difficult to suspend them or put them on an unpaid leave, and even more difficult to terminate them, because generally you can't terminate a unionized employee without just cause. So that's going to be an interesting scenario that's going to play out. For individuals who are terminated, our view is they absolutely have to be paid severance. And for any employer who doesn't pay severance to an individual who's terminated by refusing compulsory vaccination, that's a good case for wrongful dismissal.
Mm-hmm. But you said off the top that companies can do this. So what kind of recourse, or how does an employee have any kind of recourse for some kind of wrongful dismissal if companies can say you have to get vaccinated or you're out?
I think what the confusion is people confuse a right to sovereignty over their body with workplace rights. The employers can't force people to put a vaccine into their body, but they can create rules for the betterment of the workplace. Those individuals who refuse to abide by those rules can be terminated, but they do have a right to severance.
One other thing I wanted to ask you, David, is how many companies, I mean, even before this announcement today from UHN, and you noted the federal government, the Ontario government, the City of Toronto came forward with these announcements, and we saw more of the private sector follow suit. How concerned do you think the private sector was that some employees will jump ship if they learn their company saying, get vaccinated or you're out? Are they concerned about losing talent? Or when you look at it, this is so prevalent that every company really is telling people to get vaccinated that no matter where you go, you're going to run into this.
I think they're actually more concerned about losing talent if they don't tell all of their employees that they need to get vaccinated. They need to make sure that their employees feel that they've created an environment for them that it's safe for them to return, safe for them to go into the workplace, safe for them to interact with their customers. And so, I think it's not going to be a question of if organizations are now going to mandate this, it's going to be a question of when.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Before I let you both go, I want to share with you the latest Leisure poll from today, which amongst the reasons that Canadians do not plan to get the COVID-19 vaccine, 71% of Canadians say they do not believe the vaccines are safe. And then 20% say they think the vaccines are a ruse from the government to exert control. Perhaps you're both not surprised by those results. Thank you so much, David Zweig with the University of Toronto, and also Daniel Lublin, employment lawyer, as well, for sharing some of the legalities of all this. This will continue to be a hot topic, no doubt, over the next few weeks, so we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.